Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, where historical figures come alive in engaging discussions about the past and its impact on understanding our present. Joining us today are President Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, Secretary to the United States, and also Ambassador to France, among his many other accomplishments. Welcome, President Jefferson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Seated next to President Jefferson is the lovely and talented Miss Josephine Baker. Welcome, Ms. Baker.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. Seated next to Ms. Baker is Miss Sally Hemmings, slave and property of Mr. Jefferson. Seated next to Ms. Hemmings is my dear friend, former State Representative Babette Josephs. Welcome.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So I am so excited about having you all back here today. And I wanted to just ask President Jefferson, you authored the seminal document, the founding document of the United States in terms of its Declaration of Independence from Great Britain.
That is correct.
It's believed that you actually advocated for the abolition of slavery. Now, could you tell us why that language did not make it into the document itself?
It was in the original draft. However, there were many discussions in Congress. Now, I had written the original draft in June of 1776. And, of course, in July, we went into discussions over it, and it was open for debate. And to make a long story short, at least 400 words were eliminated from the document, including, as I'm sure you're well aware, the anti-slavery clause. Now, Dr. Franklin and I got into some heated discussions among other congressmen in Congress.
Now, may I just ask this? When you said that you and Dr. Franklin got into heated discussions, Dr. Franklin, interestingly enough, was a Quaker.
Yes.
From Philadelphia.
And he also founded the first anti-slavery society in this continent.
And you as a Southerner from Virginia, and the fact that the two of you got together on language is interesting.
It is. I mean, Dr. Franklin and I could see eye to eye in many aspects, one of which, of course, the main one was independence. Now, Dr. Franklin was under a lot of pressure from the northern states, whereas I was under pressure, being a Southerner, from the southern states. Northerners were very much against slavery in this country. But in the South, as was argued by many of the Southern representatives, slavery was a mainstay of the economy. And the North, industry was a mainstay of the economy, mostly immigrant and migrant workers and native-born Americans. But in the South, things were different.
I find it interesting because you also owned slaves. I understand that you wanted the abolition of slavery, but slaves were property. So would not the abolition of slavery have meant a sizable impact on your finances?
It would have indeed. Bear in mind that many of my slaves I did not purchase at first. Many of my slaves were inherited, both from an inheritance of my own family, as well as my wife Martha. She also inherited many slaves. So there's a lot of responsibilities to be taken care of, both in the keeping of the slaves and also the maintaining of the farms.
So, I understand that you inherited those slaves, or at least your wife inherited those slaves. Yes. But it seems to me that there should have been some question that you pursued even more than the fact that you owned slaves and you inherited these slaves through your wife. I mean, for instance, what kinds of things did you do for your slaves?
They had to be kept, they had to be cared for and so forth.
Like horses. I'm sorry.
No, I think that's a fair
I
statement.
completely agree.
I'm kind of interested in the fact that, quite rightly, you said, although it didn't make it into writing, that slavery would condemn this American country to many, many years of misery and division. But on the other hand, a lot of your writing and a lot of things that people have said about you seem to say that you really thought that Africans were not, they were inferior to Europeans. And I have a lot of trouble trying to reconcile your interest in ending slavery with the fact that you thought that people with dark skins were inferior.
Bear in mind, up until that time, even in modern times, in many cases, there was no fully organized government in the jungles of Africa, whereas in the European countries, there are organized systems of government.
One can make an argument there is no organized government in the United States right now, and you could certainly win a few points on it. I don't know that makes us inferior to other countries, but maybe it does.
Actually, in some ways, some countries do still view us as inferior, even though we are the greatest power on earth right now. But getting back to the point, seeing how blacks were in this country at that time, where they had been a slave race, how could you possibly view them as equal when they were brought up in a slave mentality?
I'm not so sure that that's actually what you thought. You seem to think that just from birth, just by genetics, that people who are from Africa were not as human
Superior to
as people who came from Europe. I mean,
I know the word publication published originally, going back to the 1500s, where the powers that be knew that no person in their right mind would enslave another human being. So pamphlets were printed up and distributed with these, shall we call them, explanations as to how the Africans could not possibly understand the concept of freedom due to the smaller size and different shape of the head.
Now, I want you to explain, because first of all,
yes.
Yes.
what's important for the audience to know,
Yes.
you're a scientist, and certainly this is what you're speaking of now is not accepted science. So I'm trying to understand how you, as an intelligent man, could even sit here and tell us that the slaves shouldn't be free simply because they weren't. What was your? They wouldn't understand the concept of freedom.
He said the size of their head.
Shape of the head and the
shape of the head,
smallness
yes.
of the body.
The smallness of the body, our bodies are the same, are they not?
I mean, have you seen my body?
From what I understand,
Quite a
people
bit
have
of
seen
it, yes, actually.
But these were the teachings of the time, so as a scientist, I was trying to find a genetic explanation for the teachings of the time.
And did you ever find a genetic explanation?
No, these explanations never came about.
Even through your children?
I had resolved and had done my children through you that they were indeed set free.
Still, they didn't have rights as human beings.
Well, now, I'm happy that you addressed that, Ms. Hemmings, because we know that certainly during that time, many Southern gentlemen who sired children
Yes.
with a slave made some provisions for those children. What provisions did you make for the children that you sired with Ms. Hemmings?
I want to know. Yeah.
I simply gave them their freedom. They would not be into slavery.
At how old?
At what?
At how old?
At what age she needs?
At birth.
At 21, when they came of age. That's the whole reason I came back here to America. I wouldn't have done it otherwise.
Let me understand this, Ms. Hemmings. Are you saying that, because we all know that you spent some time in France, and of course if you had remained in France you would have been free. So you came back to the United States because?
Because he promised to free my children when they came of age.
You know what the thing is, that you just could have stayed in France, and you could have persuaded him, well, since slavery was illegal in France, you could have persuaded him to free your children and free yourself and stay in France.
I see
If you
that
would have
now.
done that, you would have been a pioneer for us all.
But I am a pioneer
For women
in
and
another
for-
way.
Oh, how?
He said that a biracial America could never exist. And look at me now. And my children now, from you, are biracial, are making it in America. And the president of modern days, Barack Obama.
Yes, but it's
Biracial.
your life. It's your life, and you could have you could have been a pioneer. You could have changed the way we thought about things with you. It all could have started with you.
Well, Ms. Baker, let me just,
Yes.
because one of the points that I think we need to get to is the fact that your friend and fellow Virginian, President George Washington, freed his slaves.
That was in his will. They would be freed upon his death.
I understand, but did you write such a provision in your will?
No. Excuse me.
No, I had not.
And so I saw the reaction of Ms. Hemmings to that. And I hope that when we come back, we'll be able to delve into this a little more, because I certainly believe that there is an obligation of a father to educate his children. So we'll be back, and that'll give you a little bit of time to think about why you didn't make those provisions in your will. Hi, I'm Vivienne Crawford, and I'm inviting you to watch Conversations Across Time on PhillyCam.
So here I am, waiting for a bus on a street corner when my friend Vivienne drives by in a car and says, "Babette, I want you. I need you." So I thought, sure, and I had a card with me, my business card. I gave it to her, and I thought, I probably won't hear from Vivienne again for a while, but right away she emailed me, she called me, and now I'm doing her concept, which is really, really interesting, to make history alive and to relate it to what's happening now in our country and our world. And Vivienne dragged me into it. Oh, I can't say I really resisted too hard. And that's what I'm doing.
I'm Jennifer Burton, producer of Conversations Across Time. Watch us on PhillyCam.
Welcome back. When right before the break, we asked, or at least I asked President Jefferson to explain why he did not feel it was necessary to educate his children, the children that he sired with Sally Hemmings. And we gave you a moment to think about it, so President Jefferson, please respond.
They were free to roam society, therefore they were free to find their education on their own. As free people, they had the right to do this.
Yet you didn't make any provisions to send them north to go to university?
No.
Well, no, that's your answer. That's your answer.
University, of course, is expensive, but...
Yeah, but you were rich. I see a parallel here really between what happened to your children and your children, the same kids, and what's happening to the children of Philadelphia presently,
Yes.
where the public school system is being turned over to private operators who are dragging a profit out of poor people in our city, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that shows that these children are getting a superior education, or even an education that is equal to what they got when they were in the public school system.
May I ask?
So this is all
Well, that's just the
going
American
forward.
way.
What might you suggest to rectify the situation?
Well,
What
one
would
of
I
the things is
suggest?
that schools shouldn't be a for-profit venture.
All right, I agree with that.
What should happen in Pennsylvania is that the state government should live up to its constitutional duty to fund the local schools up to 50% of what they need to be funded. And if we demanded that, we are still in a democracy. It's hard to believe sometimes, but we are still in a democracy. If we demanded that, I believe it would happen.
It's amazing to me the way that the children are the future, and yet they're not accommodated for in any way.
Is it possible, Mr. Jefferson, you've articulated something that's really surprising to me, and that is that you at least were a part of, or at least gave some credibility to the notion that Africans and people of African descent were not equal to people of European descent. Now, given that,
Yes.
what we see today is precisely what Babette Joseph has just mentioned, and that is that for some reason today we have people who are in charge of government, in charge of public schools, in charge of whether or not children are educated, who seem to have a lot in common with your notions of African Americans, in that we know within the public school system in Philadelphia that the population is primarily African American. They seem to have bought into your theories.
Sometimes you find in these neighborhoods, the residents of these neighborhoods themselves buy into these theories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that doesn't make them right.
No, of course not.
Doesn't.
I mean, we've all heard expressions like, let me give you two separate examples here from the Black Society and the White Society in America. And I'm hoping that this will show just exactly how ridiculous some of these ideas are.
Just go ahead, say it.
When a black person starts getting too successful in life, they start hearing the expression, quit acting white. I mean, even somebody as successful as Oprah Winfrey is still hearing it. However, with white society, when a white person gets too successful, the white people will start saying, quit acting Jewish. And that's how ridiculous it is. These ideas need to be abandoned. You want acceptability as an equal person, as an African American in society? These ideas need to be abandoned.
Well, I was the most famous actress, singer, and dancer in France, and, well, I was still looked at as black. When I came to France, I was the exotic person. Everybody loved me because of my skin color, and I just couldn't find it in America.
Well,
But did you? But
And that's why
you
I
were
was-
precluded from being educated when you were in France.
Well, America.
In America, of
That's
course,
why I left.
but that's why you left.
Oh, yes.
But I think what is alarming to me, and I think that that you've touched on it, Babette, and is the notion from people who are descendants of Mr. Jefferson, in terms of that they're involved in powerful positions in running the government, seem to have the idea that people of African descent don't need to be educated. We have currently
Don't have the potential,
Exactly.
can't appreciate it. And some of the people who are making these judgments, sadly enough, are African American themselves.
I agree.
And that is always a problem. I mean, Mr. Jefferson brought up Jews. Heavens knows we're guilty of that too. I speak from being in that society. But I would like to give the president some credit, and that goes to the Lewis and Clark expedition,
yes.
which you may not know, but a slave, a former slave, and a woman
Yes.
who were on that expedition made the decisions along with the European men who were the mainstay of it, most of them, the 10 or 12 or 13. They made a decision, it was collective, and those two individuals were not excluded. So I would be happy to give you credit for that, although I'm not so sure that you deserve it. But you put that together and it happened under your auspices. So that's a plus for you, Mr. Jefferson.
But thank you, and it shows that it can be possible that different people of different races and different genders are able to work together. Is this the proof that?
Why are you trying to cover your tracks? I just don't understand it.
Who wouldn't?
I was trying to help him out here, Miss Baker. You know, you tear him down. It's okay. I'll tell you something else that bothers me really a lot that we were kind of talking about during the break. The two cities that have failed in this country are predominantly African American cities, New Orleans and just now Detroit.
Yes.
And Philadelphia, although it's going to soon be a Latino city, which will be very exciting, is right now predominantly African American. So are we next?
And that is an interesting question. And I wonder when the Founding Fathers came up with the idea of the type of government we should have. If indeed you ever considered the fact that we would be in a society where wealth controls what happens. And I say that because the reason that Philadelphia is failing, the reason that Detroit is failing, has to do with the fact that the wealthy of this nation decided to export the jobs. You drive through areas of Detroit, you drive through areas of Philadelphia, and what do you see? You see abandoned factories. Those were jobs. Those were, I passed a factory on my way here today, and I was talking with my friend, and I said, how many people do you think worked in that factory? And the fact that that factory supported a neighborhood, it was the job that everyone in that neighborhood had. And I'm wondering, Mr. Jefferson, since you had this notion of, you didn't like the imperialism of Great Britain, but we now have imperialism in this country. We now have the almighty dollar as being the decision maker.
We've turned into what we originally fought against. It's an insult to history. Add to the fact these jobs that we outsourced out to other countries, they work for basically pennies on the dollar. It's legalized slavery, and this is what I spoke out against. It's moral depravity and a hideous blot on our nation's record. As we all know, the right to be free comes from nature itself, and this is basically anti-nature.
Now, isn't that interesting? So we have sitting with us a founding father, principal author of the Declaration of Independence, who, by all accounts, was interested in abolishing slavery, and he is able to articulate to us tonight that, in fact, we are headed back to the very thing we fought against, and we are headed back to slavery.
Basically, except it's like a legal loophole. Instead of the slaves being on our own continent, we do not import slaves, we simply import our jobs to the slaves in other countries.
I called a local phone company with a problem and talked to somebody who told me he was in the Philippines.
My gosh.
That was actually not as far away as some of the other people I've talked to in China.
Or India.
Or India.
And at first you would think we're finally getting our act together and hiring minorities to work at these companies, and no, well, actually we are hiring minorities, they just happen to be in other countries.
And happen to be working under conditions that would not be allowed in this country.
That's correct.
Unless you're a fast food worker.
That's correct. That's correct.
Technically speaking, that is illegal. Because if they work for us, for our companies, then our companies, as you had mentioned, need to provide for their workers, but grass huts, basically, is what they live in, which is not an established
Treat their
norm.
workers the way you treated your children, Mr. Jefferson.
Oh, yes. Vous êtes un menteur et hypocrite. Write that down. You're a hypocrite and a liar.
All right.
Good, yes. And a liar.
Liar. Anything else, mademoiselle?
No, she's so charming when she says that to you, that you have no choice but to accept it.
Well, like they say, it isn't what they say, but how you say it. Or in some cases, not what you say, but rather who says it. Makes all the difference.
Well,
You're still a hypocrite and a liar.
It's a very interesting, to me, aspect of human nature that you can hold these beliefs in your mind at the same time and still manage to go forward and be a president. Whole bunch of people are inferior, but enslaving them is wrong.
He almost reminds me of Christopher Columbus occupying land, occupying a woman that's not yours and that isn't your property in any way.
Christopher Columbus, I'll guess, was under some pressure from Queen Isabella of Spain. Once he discovered the New World and sent back that there were people living here, she immediately made the decision to enslave them. When the natives here had fought back, in fact, Christopher Columbus and his men were nearly killed, that's when Queen Isabella of Spain made the decision to start importing Africans to this continent.
So let me see if I get this then. You can see the problems with Queen Isabella making the decision to enslave Native Americans. Yet when you, as a founding father of this country, inherited slaves, you didn't make any provision to free them.
Vivienne, it's because he's in denial. He doesn't, you just don't get it, do you?
At the time I was a young man. I had no political power, I had no power whatsoever. I was just a young man of 21 at the time I inherited
You
it.
had enough power to give my family away as Christmas presents, as birthday presents.
In 1778, though, I did draft laws in Virginia prohibiting the importation of slaves.
The importation, but what about the fact that there were slaves that you owned at that time?
It was intended to be gradual. Once the practice of importing slaves had stopped, the practice of slavery would have eventually gone away with.
But it got bigger instead. There
Unfortunately,
got to be more slaves.
Yes,
it doubled, unfortunately, within
Yes.
a 30-year period.
Yes.
There's only so much a president can do, only so much a plantation or any individual can do on their own. However, you did mention this is still a democracy. There are power in numbers.
And if we can manage to keep the vote, then we can use
Yes.
it, perhaps. Another big issue.
Then I suggest come next election, you research your candidates more thoroughly and vote for the ones that can do away with some of these evilness that's going on right now.
If there are power in numbers and African Americans are only 3/4 of human beings, then we don't count.
Well, these
And
are-
how can we vote for a better law, for a better way of life?
Do you see that when you say that we should research our candidates, the candidates that are presented to us are already gone through a distillation process by the powers. In other words, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, when they present us with candidates, they are not necessarily candidates of the people. They are just candidates who have the money to be able to win.
It's unfortunate that some of the better candidates fall victim to what's commonly known as mudslinging. We all know this. This is how things work. There is such a thing as grassroots organizations, independent powers. People can work around the rules. They can work around the status quo. They can find out things.
And I want to thank you, President Jefferson, for at least coming around to our point of view to say that, in fact, maybe there's something that can be done. I know we have much more to talk about. I don't think we'll ever be able to resolve the issue in terms of the education and the fact that African Americans are generally just gone, they're put through the school system, but it's a school system to prison pipeline. So that's something that is cause for much debate. But I thank you for joining. I thank you for you being here, Ms. Baker, Ms. Hemmings, and Babette. As always, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I want to say to our audience, I hope that you were enlightened today. I hope that you were empowered by the conversation that you heard today. Because remember, Conversations Across Time is here to entertain, but it's also here to educate. And I hope that you were educated tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across time. across time. Conversations 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 across time. Conversations.